Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another live stream here on the channel. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. And as you can see, I am joined by friend of the show and returning guest, Scott Ritter. He's a former UN weapons inspector, former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer, journalist, geopolitical analyst. Scott, it's good to have you back on. I know we have a lot to talk about. A lot has happened since the last time you were here, since the last time we saw each other, which was at your wonderful book event in New York City. How are you this evening?
I'm doing great, thanks. Yourself?
I am doing okay. Everyone, before we get started with the conversation, be sure to hit the like button as you are coming into the live stream. That helps boost the stream and the algorithm. In the video description, you can find scottritter.com, Scott Ritter's website, where his Substack and other works can all be found. And you can also find his Telegram in the video description as well. Also in the video description is all the places where you can support this channel. Patreon, Substack, PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, and more. Let me just actually hit the live button on Rockfin. We should be live on Rumble now. All right. So, Scott, how about we just begin, since it's been quite an eventful last several weeks for you? How about we begin? There are kind of two things happening. One, there was the very chilling raid on your house by the FBI, and we also have an invasion coordinated, of course, with the assistance of NATO and the United States, but Ukraine has invaded Kursk. How about we begin with just, you have been doing so much work around building peace, developing improved U.S. Russia relations, especially people-to-people ties. Could you talk about how these parallel developments, what has happened to you and what is happening in this conflict, are related, and perhaps how it motivates your ongoing work despite all that has been going on for you?
Well, I guess let's go back to 2022. Once upon a time, I published a book called "Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika: Arms Control and the End of the Soviet Union." It was a memoir and a history of my experience as a weapons inspector implementing the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty between the United States and Russia. And it wasn't just a history of the treaty, but it was also a story of my personal transformation from somebody who had spent all my meaningful adult life up until that point learning how to kill Russians, training, singly focused on killing Russians, closing with and destroying the Soviet enemy through firepower and maneuver. And suddenly to find myself thrust into literally the middle of the Soviet Union, in the city of Votkins, outside the Votkins machine building plant, monitoring the production of Soviet intercontinental ballistic missiles. And in the process, living amongst the enemy, the Soviets, the Russians, and realizing that, after not just living amongst them, but working with them, learning about them, seeing them as fellow human beings, realizing that I didn't really want to kill these people anymore, that what I had been doing made no sense. And that led me down the path of believing that nuclear war should be avoided at all costs. The treaty that I implemented was the first treaty to eliminate an entire class of nuclear delivery systems, intermediate range missiles. It helped stabilize the world. I believe it helped save the world. And I became a big believer in arms control and a big believer in, avoiding conflicts, of repairing relations between nations. Never forget that when I went to the Soviet Union initially in 1988, we still referred to them as the evil empire, and they referred to us as enemy number one. And when I left, we considered ourselves to be friends. So that's the background. So I wrote this book, and in talking to people, um, I realized that this wasn't just history. This was a template for the future. Um, that when people say, well, how can we get out of this mess we're in between Russia and the United States? This is after the initiation of the special military operation. There's no hope. And I said, well, wait a minute, there is hope. We already did it, because the Cold War was just as bad or worse than what was going on in 2022. And I said, so, this book can be not just to teach you about the past, but maybe chart a path towards the future. So I started talking about, how to improve relations, the importance of improving relations. And that's when I was invited to go to Russia, because the Russians were listening to this message, and they said, we like what we're hearing. I'm not talking about the Russian government. I'm talking about the Russian people. They're saying, yeah, give us some more of this, people to people stuff. And they like the fact that I was open to learning more about Russia, to consider their point of view, to do as John F. Kennedy asked every American to do in his American University speech in June of 1963, to spend some time in the shoes of your adversary, to contemplate life from their perspective. And so, I was invited to go to Russia. I did travel to Russia, and the trip was a great success. The book was translated into Russian. I had a fantastic book tour in Russia, and it looked like this concept of people-to-people diplomacy, promoting peace, was getting some traction. Scared the crap out of the American government. Scared the living dog poop out of them. And it turns out that I guess the U.S. government doesn't trust its citizens to have a mind of their own, to think that maybe there's a better way of doing things than that of the government solution. That my way or the highway is the government position. But the Biden administration was married to a policy of confrontation, and I guess I should be honored. The more successful I got, the more afraid they became of what was going on, and they have concocted out of plain cloth a case that I'm somehow operating under the direction of the Russian government, taking their orders and furthering their policies to the detriment of American policies. I find this stunning, though, because U.S. government knows who I am. I've been around a while. I was in the U.S. government. I wasn't a general, but hell, they knew who I was because I functioned in some very important positions that I guess raised my profile, so to speak. And the notion that Scott Ritter would take instructions from the Russian government to the detriment of the United States of America, it just that doesn't fly. I'm the most patriotic person you're going to meet. I'm a fanatic about my country, a fanatic. But the thing about being a fanatic means that maybe I define my country different than some Americans do. You see, I believe in the Constitution. I took an oath to it, to uphold and defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And, the Constitution begins, "We the people of the United States." Abraham Lincoln, and referring to, the formation of the nation, spoke of government of the people, by the people, for the people. And the Constitution has some very important amendments. The Bill of Rights, number one of which is free speech. And when we look at the struggle of free speech in America, maybe there's no greater instance of the defense of free speech and the importance of free speech than Daniel Ellsberg's publication of the Pentagon Papers back in 1971. The United States government took the New York Times to task, and this went to the Supreme Court, the United States versus the New York Times. And the Supreme Court found 6-3 that the U.S. government couldn't prevent the New York Times from publishing this. And Justice Hugo Black wrote a concurring opinion, and he basically just lambasted the idea that the government can tell the American people what to say. that government can interfere with the press. He said it can't happen. A free press, he said, a free press is for the governed to hold the governors accountable, not the other way around. What part of that doesn't the FBI get? You don't get to dictate what free press is. I'm sorry. I know you got a badge. You got a fancy blue jacket with big yellow letters on the back. And I know you can cuff me and put me in jail, but screw you. And to the FARA enforcement unit, screw you as well. You don't get to do that. If you want to fight, you got it right here. Okay? Let me tell you about the United States Marine Corps. We don't run. We don't hide. And we don't just sit there and take it. I will fricking go on the offensive here. All right. They have accused me of being an agent of Russia because I wrote a damn article. I wrote an article about Russophobia. I wrote an article about the dangers of Russophobia. And I used as a source for this article an essay written by Anatoly Antonov, the Russian ambassador. You see, I had visited the Russian embassy. Oh, Scott, you shouldn't have. Screw you. I just told you that I was going to Russia on a book tour. Now, come on, people, put on your thinking cap for a second. I'm going to go to Russia on a book tour. A former intelligence officer is going to go to Russia on a book tour. And I want to have it to be a successful book tour. So I went to the Russian embassy to brief them on what I was going to do, not to take orders from them, but to tell them what I was planning on doing so that I didn't end up in a Russian jail with the Russians saying an intelligence officer came to our country and was running around doing stuff. I wanted to say, this is what I'm doing. Don't be afraid about it. Do you have any questions about what I'm about to do so that, I can make this thing go off smoothly? And the Russians appreciated me doing this. They said, thank you very much. They actually, I believe, wrote a memorandum back to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to say, yeah, Ritter's coming. He talked to us about it. Seems like it's a legit trip. Maybe you don't arrest him. But we also had a conversation. And at that point in time, they said, hey, the ambassador wrote this essay. And I said, cool. And they said, I said, why don't you get it published? And they said, well, New York Times, Washington Post won't touch it. I said, well, that's too bad. And they said, you think you could help us get it published? I said, I don't know. Call Nation Magazine, call Consortium News. I said, I'll see. And I did. And Nation never responded. Consortium News said, no, we ain't running something directly from the Russian embassy. And I said, that ain't going to happen. But what I'll do is I'll write my own article. So I did. Now, it's curious. The FBI, when they came to the house, was questioning me. And one of the agents, they had all my communications. Of course they do. They've been monitoring me for a while. And they presented me with the email chain. And she says, you were working on behalf of the Russian government. I said, are you high? Do you know what journalism is? Do you understand the concept of a source, incorporating the source? Did you read the damn article? The article lays out exactly what happened, how I got this essay, why I decided to write it, what it was. My initiative. The concept of Russophobia was something that I highlighted in a speech I gave on February 19th, or I didn't give, but I published, I think, on the 10th. I was supposed to deliver it live on February 19th at the Rage Against the War Machine, but the libertarians didn't want me to be there. So I published it in my Substack. But it's, talks about the importance of addressing Russophobia. I'm the one that raised the issue of Russophobia that prompted them to say, oh, well, the ambassador just wrote an essay. The concept that I'm under the direction of the Russians is the most insulting stupidity possible. And the idea that the FBI gets to say, this is journalism, this isn't journalism. Screw you. The Supreme Court says otherwise, pal. The Supreme Court says that I, as an American citizen, I, as a journalist, get to define this. And, this is it. So that's it. That article got the government saying Scott Ritter works for the frickin' Russians. And then I went to Russia on that book tour, scared the crap out of them because it was a big success. Got a lot of publicity. Things were working. And now, you see, now I'm working for the Russians to try and change American politics. This becomes political. And if you go and read the FARA regulation, It basically is a law that gives the United States the ability to do anything it wants to anybody who dares interact with a foreign government in any way. It's a very loosely written regulation. And again, I go to the First Amendment. The Congress of the United States shall not pass any laws that infringe on freedom of speech or a free press. Well, FAR is written by the Congress of the United States. It's a law. It is being used by the executive to infringe on free speech and a free press. This is war, baby. This is war. If that's what they want, that's what they got. So what I'm hoping is that the FBI, having seized my electronics and will review them, will realize, because I don't know what they thought they were going to find. Secret communications that they didn't already have, covert means of communications. I don't know. Maybe we did some fancy stuff. I don't know what they thought they were going to get. The warrant was specifically only to electronics. Although the irony is, and I tried to tell the FBI, I said, my job is sort of defined by A, telling the truth, and B, not backing down when people confront me. I mentioned my experience as a weapons inspector in Iraq and the fact that, gosh, back then the U.S. government viewed me as a shill of Saddam. How dare you travel to Iraq and make a documentary film that 30 some odd years later is the most accurate depiction of what was going on. Everything in the documentary film was correct. You wrote an article talking about the qualitative disarmament of Iraq that turned out to be 100% correct. How dare you be right on the issue of weapons of mass destruction? The U.S. government would have arrested me, called me a foreign agent working on behalf of Iraq because I dared say that U.S. policy was wrong, that U.S. policy was factually inaccurate. The thing that gave me the ability to confront the United States government successfully there were the receipts I had from 7 years of work as a weapons inspector. And what I mean by receipts, I mean the documents. You see, when I realized in the summer of 1998 that the U.S. government was getting ready to shut everything down and start promulgating the big lie, I started preserving the documentary evidence. And when I left, I had an archive. And that archive I used frequently. I would know that, for instance, I went on the Phil Donahue show, and Richard Butler, my former boss, was there. And Butler was saying that everything I was saying was a lie, everything was that. So I brought a bag full of documents. And live on TV, he called me a liar, and I said, "You want me to open up the bag, Richard? I've got every receipt, every request that I made to you, signed by you right now. You want me to open it, Richard? Because it'll show that you're the liar." Phil Donahue said, "Well, we don't want to do that." Richard got scared because I had the receipts. The receipts empowered me. Well, while they're inspecting my house, or I wouldn't say inspecting, taking my house apart, looking for electronics, they went down the basement and they opened up the my file cabinets, and they see the documents. Now, some of the documents are provided by foreign governments, including the United States, and they would have very few of them, but some of them classification markings on them. Secret, released to UNSCOM. And the FBI came up, "Scott, we have a problem here." I said, "What's your problem?" "Well, we found documents." I said, "Well, there's your first problem. You're not supposed to be looking for documents. You're supposed to be looking for electronics." "Yes, but there's classified markings." I said, "No, there's not. It's not a classified marking." I said, "Look, you're the FBI. You're the National Security Division. We've done this before in 1998 when you were going to arrest me and prosecute me for espionage because I took material that the United States gave to the United Nations and I took it to Israel, ordered by the United Nations in coordination with the CIA to do analysis. I was doing my job. But somebody in the FBI decided that because the United States chose to mark this information secret, releasable UNSCOM, that I was taking U.S. secrets to Israel. And so the FBI was going to arrest me. Fortunately for me, the CIA General Counsel wrote a memorandum to the FBI saying, "No, that's not how it works. You see, we may mark it secret, but the moment we give it to UNSCOM, it's automatically declassified because UNSCOM is an international organization. They can't retain secret information. They're not an independent classification authority. There's no information provided to UNSCOM can be classified. So everything is unclassified. And I said, you guys know that because you've done this before to me. So, well, we have to take this material anyways. So the FBI took my, I don't know how many pages, 70, 80,000 pages worth of my archive. The archive, the history of the UN inspections of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. They promised they'd give it back once they did the review. I don't know. I mean, the people that came to my house were very professional, very courteous. I have no reason to impugn their integrity, but I don't trust them. And I'll tell you why. Because somebody, maybe not them, maybe somebody else, provided an affidavit to a federal magistrate judge that said there was probable cause to search my house. That means that they told the judge that they needed to gain entry into my house and gain access to my computer and my cell phone because there was probable cause that something was on that computer and cell phone that would further their case that I was a foreign agent of Russia. There's nothing that would further the case. They have all the communications. They've been listening to my calls. They've been monitoring my emails. So somebody made something up, and that's disturbing. That's very disturbing. So am I supposed to believe these guys when they say, well, give me the archive back? I can tell you right now, that's the second war we're going to have. I'm going to win the first battle first, which is the battle over the concept that the FBI and the Department of Justice gets to determine what journalism is or isn't, and that they can hold journalists accountable for doing their job. So we're going to fight that one first. Hopefully it won't be a fight. Hopefully the FBI realizes that they don't have anything. They don't have a case, and they just drop it. But then we go to phase two, which is give me my damn archive back, because that's mine, and I use it. I write articles, I write books. I'm in the process of writing a book that makes use of this archive, and so they need to return it. But it's just a very disconcerting, unsettling experience. I mean, it's if you don't know what it's like to have, 20 to 30 armed individuals, they never threaten me. When I say armed, I don't want people to think that they were running around, threatening to point a gun. They're FBI agents. They carry weapons. But still, it's sort of disconcerting. They all have weapons and handcuffs, which carries the inherent threat of we can shoot you and cuff you anytime we want to. And what can you do? Nothing. Not a damn thing. So it's disconcerting to have them come in here and, again, they didn't destroy my house. I give them that. They were very respectful. I give them that. But it's an unpleasant experience nonetheless. And they've cost me thousands of dollars. The reason why we're able to do this tonight is I had to get a new computer. I had to get a new phone. I had to get my wife a new iPad so that she can do her thing, because they took all the electronics. We even went and bought a new TV, because I tell you what, we had one of those Samsung LED TVs, and as soon as the FBI left, FBI, I'm not accusing you of anything, but you know what you did. The TV, which can be turned into a listening device, anybody who knows anything knows that that's how it works. And it just started screwing up. And so I said, screw it, we're getting rid of this TV too. So we got rid of the TV. We bought a new TV. I'm sure they did technical penetration of the house. I'm sure they're listening to this right now. I'm waving to the camera so they can see my best angle. I don't care, but it is a little bit disconcerting to have the federal government do that, because while I'm not going to predict the outcome, and I hope that these people are people of honor who take their oath to the Constitution seriously, there are enough horror stories out there about the abuses of power. Just ask Mike Flynn. Just ask Donald Trump. I mean, if they could screw with the president of the United States, again, we're talking about the National Security Division of the FBI, Operation Crossfire Hurricane, the falsification of the Russian collusion case, charges by the FBI, the manipulation of Christopher Steele and his fake sources by the FBI to take down the president of the United States. They could do it to the president. They could do it to anybody in the United States. They have absolute power, literally unchecked power. And we're totally dependent upon the honor of the individuals who carry that badge and carry that gun. The people seem to be honorable people that came here, but The proof is in the pudding. Let's see what they do. Right now, the ball's in their court. And again, I'm confident, absolutely confident, they will find nothing on the computers because there's nothing on the computers. But I'm also nervous that they did this the way they did it. Because again, if this was just concern, the Fair Enforcement Unit sends out a letter of inquiry. It's a very polite letter. It says, "Dear Mr. Ritter, we're the Fair Enforcement Unit, and we believe that you are engaged in activities that would require you to register as a foreign agent. This is what we believe you're doing, and we'd like you to give us your version of the stories, provide documents, etc." Very civil. Could have been done that way. They opted to raid my house, daytime raid, press, and now you understand the consequences of it, because now it's looming out there because the press is stupid. The mainstream media is ignorant and dumb, especially the Albany one. The Albany Times Union is one of the worst newspapers in the world, especially about local stories. They have to gin it up and spin it up. And, so now it's out there and it's all, well, the FBI went into his house. Where there's smoke, there's fire. You don't realize that the FBI set the fire that made the smoke. I mean, it's, and so that's hanging out there. People are just like, well, why did the FBI go to you? I just told you why. But there has to be another reason, isn't there? I don't know. They didn't articulate another reason. I can't think of another reason they would come. I didn't think they were ever going to come because I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't violating the law. But it's just disconcerting in the extreme. But this is a big deal. This is a very big deal. And every journalist out there, especially independent alternative media journalists, there before the grace of God go you. You're especially advocacy journalists, people who believe in a cause and are pushing that cause. And if that cause has anything to do with the foreign policy of the United States, and you go to Venezuela and you interview somebody there, you're next. If you go to China and you interview somebody there, you're next. So you're not allowed to be a journalist if the advocacy journalism that you're pursuing happens to coincide with the ideas that are being promulgated by a foreign government. And so this is a big, big deal, a huge deal. And I'm hoping that, the alternative, media community out there understands this and rallies behind it, not because you like me. Look, I get it. I'm abrasive and, I have my opinions and all that kind of stuff. I don't care if you like me or not. I really don't. But you should care about what's happening here, because if they win this, they're not going to, but if they do, you're next. It's the end of independent journalism, especially independent advocacy journalism that is in opposition to the policies of the United States, the foreign policy of the United States. The way the FAR regulation is written, the second you say, I'm writing a story that's designed to educate the American people about the failure of American policy, they'll say, you're trying to change the mindset of the American people on behalf of that government. Therefore, you must register as a foreign agent. This is a battle for everybody.
No, I mean, those are all really good points. This is what happened during the Cold War a lot in the United States as well. We've even seen in the last few years with people like Amalia Shatela, who, especially targeting people who've traveled, especially to Russia. That's why I asked you about tying it into Kursk, because I feel like there is this target on you, Scott, because of your travels to Russia and what you are trying to accomplish, and to label it as the work of a foreign agent is a huge way of discrediting this kind of work, which is really all about building relationships that can bind us together in opposition to, as you said, a foreign policy that is moving and pushing toward nuclear war and all the catastrophes that come before the nuclear war, which we are seeing play out so grimly in Ukraine right now. So all of your points very, very well taken, Scott. I did want to in the interest of time, and of course you can tie everything into this, but I wanted to ask you about the Kursk offensive, because there's a lot of fog of war around the Kursk offensive right now. Russia is saying that they are just absolutely obliterating NATO, U.S. armored vehicles, more than a couple thousand Ukrainian soldiers. I mean, this is just over a week, I believe, since this started, and a couple of thousand Ukrainian troops have been killed. Civilians have been killed by Ukrainian troops. There's the attack on the nuclear power plant there. So there have been fragments of missiles found on the complex. Could you talk about what is happening in the Kursk offensive that the Western mainstream media right now, and of course the entirety of the United States NATO axis, they are all celebrating this literal invasion of Russian territory? So what's going on?
Well, generally, when we talk about issues of this nature, I say right up front, I'm thousands of miles away, distant from the problem, and I'm a prisoner of the same data set that you and everybody else has. What we can get, on on the internet, from newspapers, from interviews that other people do. But in this case, it's different. And again, you asked in the beginning, how you tie in what happened to me with the FBI and what's going on in Kursk. You may have noticed that there's a Chechen gentleman named Abdi Aladanov. He's a major general in the Russian armed forces, and he is the commander of the Akhmat Special Forces, which is more than just Chechens. It includes the special forces of the Russian Federation. It includes a Wagner element that transitioned over to the Russian Ministry of Defense and operates as part of the Akhmat Special Forces, and some other units. And these are the units that responded quickly to deal with the Kursk situation. I know Abdi Aladanov pretty well. We've met several times. I've interviewed him several times. I've had personal conversations with him several times. I feel comfortable enough to say that when I know him well enough to know the man behind the voice. So when I see Abdi Aladanov on TV talking, or on his videos talking, I can listen to the tenor of his voice. I can look at his eyes. I can see, what's going on behind his eyes. And it tells a story that for the average person, you wouldn't be able to get. First of all, I would tell you that he's not panicked at all. There's no panic in the man. When he's a Chechen, remember, Abdi he's a hero of Russia. I mean, literally, he's got the medal. But he's done some amazing things from a warrior standpoint. He in the Second Chechen War, he made a decision that he wasn't going to continue to fight the Russians, because the Chechen cause had been hijacked by the West, by the CIA, who was bringing in radical non-Chechen Wahhabist jihadists, and so he went over and joined up with Akhmat Kadyrov, the father of Ramzan Kadyrov, and he began to fight the jihadists. One of the jihadists was a guy named Shamil Basayev. Shamil Basayev was a Chechen who fought in Abkhazia against the Georgians in 1992, 1993, and then later fought against the Russians. He's the guy who did the Beslan school massacre. He's responsible for some of the worst atrocities. And when Abdi went over and to the Russian side with Akhmat Kadyrov, Shamil Basayev killed his uncles, his brothers, his cousins, slaughtered Abdi's family. Abdi went into the mountains with a handful of Chechen special forces and spent several months hunting down Shamil Basayev's band, more than 100 guys. And eventually played a role in killing every single one of them, including Shamil Basayev. This is a serious dude. This is the real deal. And so, there's no panic in his voice because he's not going to panic, but he's as honest as the day is long. I mean, the guy just doesn't know how to tell a lie. And he's, if you listen, he's the one voice that said the Ministry of Defense has lied to itself so many times that they start to believe their lies. He's the only Russian official saying that. And he can get away with it because he's on the front line dealing with the consequences of these lies. What happened in Kursk is the incompetence of the Russian Ministry of Defense that left a critical area on the border unguarded. I mean, you can't put poorly trained 18-year-old conscripts assigned to the border guard, on the border and expect them to stand up against what turned out to be, elements of the 18 best units in the Ukrainian armed forces, the best equipped units, the best trained units, the best prepared units, who came in operating with American intelligence using total spectrum warfare, advanced communication systems, using artificial intelligence based upon real-time intelligence to predict Russian movements, to anticipate gaps, and then to exploit these gaps. There was no one behind these guys. They came through and off they went. And it was Opti's job to come in and clean this mess up. And he's done it. He's doing it. Slaughtering the Ukrainians. I mean, he's killed thousands of them. He's destroying all of their equipment, and it's over. All that's left now is to kill those who are starting to dig in. Don't believe anything you're seeing on Western TV. Don't believe any of the garbage that comes out on the Ukrainian Twitter. It's just, believe Opti Aladanov. Now here's where it comes in. I right now could pick up the phone and contact Opti right now. But I'm concerned. I'm a journalist, but would I be, digging my own grave to call Opti Aladanov right now and get an interview to talk about what's going on? There's a hesitancy here. Now, I'm going to tell you that hopefully next week that hesitancy will go away because I have put in the request formally so that it's done. So no one can say, well, it's personal. You're taking, this is only because you work for the Russians that you're able to talk to Opti. I've gone in and made the formal request through other channels, and hopefully I'll be able to have this conversation. But journalists have their sources. Opti Aladanov, I'm not calling him my source. I don't want to get him in trouble. He's a very responsible individual, but I do have his contact information, and he is making press appearances. And under normal circumstances, I would have picked this damn thing up, and I'd be able to sit here and tell you tonight, yeah, I just got off the phone with Opti Aladanov, and this is what he said. But because of this ongoing FBI investigation, I have to be very, very careful on how I proceed. And that's not what a free press is. That's not what a free press is. And you know what? The U.S. government doesn't want me talking to Opti Aladanov. They don't want that truth out there. The U.S. government right now is working with CNN to promulgate crap, and more crap. I just want to remind everybody out there, including the FBI, because I know you're here tonight. Welcome. And again, thank you for not shooting my dogs when you came in my house. I really appreciate you letting me put them in the backyard. But, you don't get to, you don't get to do what you're doing. You don't get to dictate these stories. You are part of a national security establishment that declassifies intelligence and releases it to the press for the purpose of manipulating public opinion. You want to know how I know that? Because you admit that the intelligence you declassify is wrong, and you know it's wrong. You know it's not accurate, and yet you release it to the press as if it's accurate. So the press can say declassified intelligence shows that Russia, that China, and you do it, you're lying to the American people, using the mainstream media as a vehicle to tell these lies, to manipulate public opinion. You know what the watchguard against this manipulation of data by the US government is? You and me. We're the watchguards. We're the guys that bark. We're the guys that say, not on our watch. Not on our watch. And right now, the US government is spreading lies to CNN, to MSNBC, to all the major news networks, to the New York Times. Lies, lies, and lies. They get published to an American audience that goes, well, it's the New York Times. It must be true. No, it's a lie. All of it's a lie. The antidote to the lies is the truth that comes from independent media that goes out there and finds real sources of information, like Abdi Aladanov. They don't want you to hear from Abdi Aladanov. They want to manipulate. And here's the FBI, who knows this is taking place and indeed on some occasions has participated in the charade itself. They have corrupted mainstream media, turned it into little more than a stenographer for government lies. And they had the audacity to say that my journalism needs to be categorized as the byproduct of a relationship with a foreign government that is directive in nature. I can tell you, Abdi Aladanov isn't calling me up saying, Scott, you have to call me so that I can talk to you. The Russian government's not saying, Scott, we need you to pursue talking points A, B, and C. That's not what happens. Scott Ritter wakes up in the morning and says, look at the lies being told by the US government. How can I overcome these lies with the truth? And how can I gain access to that truth? By going to Russia, meeting with people like Abdi Aladanov, establishing relations so that when the time comes, you can gain access to this information. It doesn't mean that you take everything that's said at face value. No, the job of a journalist is to be skeptical. But at least now I've received information from a source I trust that I can evaluate and then weigh off against what's being told elsewhere and use my experience to say, this is what I think's happening. This is what I think is happening, not what's being dictated from above by the Russian government. I don't mean to beat a dead horse here, Danny, but this is a very dangerous time in the United States. We are on the cusp, because let's talk about Kursk for a second. I just want to also remind people what happened in Kursk is that NATO invaded Russia. NATO invaded Russia. NATO invaded Russia. This isn't, Russia invaded Ukraine, so the Ukrainians get to attack Russia. No, Russia didn't invade Ukraine. Russia responded to Ukrainian war crimes that were put in place after the 2014 Maidan coup, backed by the CIA, part of an effort of using Ukraine to bring down Russia. And the Ukrainian ultranationalists had spent a decade slaughtering ethnic Russians and Russian-speaking people in the Donbass. And Russia finally said enough is enough, and they came in to end that. This is a special military operation designed to preserve the rights of a Russian population that was being subjected to cultural genocide and subjected to mass murder. Ukraine doesn't get to commit a crime and then say, but since you're holding us accountable to that crime, we're going to invade Russia. But it's not even Ukraine invading Russia. You see, the force that's going in is a force that's hand-built by NATO. I just interviewed a Russian senator. He's the head of the Veterans Committee, very close to Putin, very close to the Ministry of Defense, and he's down in Kursk right now. And he said, we being the Russians have captured a lot of equipment and a lot of people, and we're putting it together. He said this group that came in is equipped to the highest modern NATO standards, better than most NATO units. They use full spectrum dominance theories. They have Starlink connectivity at the vehicle level, sometimes at the small unit level. And all of this is fed up through satellites down to, back down to the command staff to get real-time location. They can track the movement of their forces. They have real-time intelligence coming in saying where the Russians are, and they use artificial intelligence to not only maneuver, but to deploy new drones, a new generation of drones, high-speed drones, AI-driven drones that flood the battlefield. This is the NATO army, the Polish-speaking, French-speaking, English-speaking NATO army that invaded Russia at the command of NATO. This wasn't the initiative of the Ukrainian government. This was something that NATO planned. NATO is executing. The Russians have the receipts, and but they also have all of the equipment, and they've reverse engineered it. And they said, "Wow, you guys came in with the best you got, and it's pretty damn good." It was impressive. But Opti Eladanov has come in, and he's impressive. One of Opti's specialties, and this is why he's been promoted so rapidly, is that he is a quick learner. And when you go on the battlefield and you experience things, you adapt. You come up with new concepts, new tactics, new operational theories. And they pulled Opti out of the battlefield and sent him to the General Staff Academy, not only to learn from others, but to teach people too about his experience. And you see these generals, these officers come from the battlefield, and they share their experiences. And then that gets turned around into interim doctrine that's published down. And the Russian army is always learning, always getting better. And right now from Kursk, there's a whole new set of lessons learned that are being fed back into the Russian military education system to educate everybody from the private to the general about what the hell's going on with this new technology. But this is a serious thing. NATO invaded Russia. People, you got to understand that if the Russians went to Mexico and brought in Colombians and brought in Venezuelans and brought in Cubans, and next thing you know, 25,000 of them with the best equipment, organized, crossed the border and captured Columbus, New Mexico, and Pancho Villa Part 2, we'd be going to war against Mexico, and we'd be going to war against Russia. You don't get to invade the United States and not expect to pay a price. NATO invaded Russia. And so there will be a Russian response. That's the other thing this senator said, is that sometime in the not too distant future, and he said, you'll know it when it happens, but Ukraine is going to pay a very, very heavy price. And he said, so too will NATO. He said that the concept of NATO bases in Poland and Romania that are being used, for instance, to house F-16s, being able to operate without consequence is no longer part of the reality. We are so close to a direct conflict between Russia and NATO. Right now, it's a proxy conflict, but we are so close to a direct conflict, which means we're very close to a nuclear war, which means we're all very close to dying. NATO invaded Russia, and you got the Germans. I mean, the Germans have gone insane. The Germans have literally gone insane. You have German officers, retired and active duty, sort of smirking. Yes, we know German tanks are back in Kursk, and we know what happened the last time we're there, and we're happy that things are different this time. Jawohl, mein Herr. Jawohl. I mean, that's what happened. You scratch a German, you get a Nazi. You guys think I'm joking? The German military just tried to slip something through. I don't know if you heard about this, because they've the remilitarization, again, scratch a German, get a Nazi. They've decided they want to become a militarized society again, and so they've elevated the Wehrmacht in World War II to some sort of revered status where now Germans are allowed to revere the memory of those who served in the Wehrmacht during the Second World War, forgetting for a moment that they did serve Adolf Hitler. But no, these were simple German soldiers, and they must be revered. And so they slipped in. They said, hey, yeah, we'd also like to revere the SS and the SD and all those other Nazi organizations. We want them to be revered too. And fortunately, there was somebody in German civil society that went, what? No. And the German army had to pull back. But the fact that the German army thought that this was a good thing tells you about the sickness of that. This is scary. This is scary. We have Germany acting like, this is a cool thing to have German tanks on Russian soil killing Russians. It's not a cool thing. It's not. It's a very dangerous thing, and yet all the NATO and NAFO and whatever the hell you want to call them cheerleaders out there, they're acting like this is great. Ukraine's in Kursk. Well, first of all, they're all going to die or be taken prisoner. Very few of them are going to survive. Russia's already blown away all of the logistical support infrastructure in Sumy, which is on the Ukrainian side of the border, and they've blown up the tanks. They've run out of gas, and so the Ukrainians right now are digging in. They're going to run out of ammunition. Then they're all going to die. That's just the reality of it. Is Opti Aladanov is very confident. And again, I met the guy. I know the guy. I look at his eyes. I listen to the tenor of his voice. This isn't a guy that's putting. Now, for all the people out there, that Chechens are TikTok warriors. TikTok fake warriors. I'll tell you a little story. So I'm in Moscow, and Steven Seagal had asked to meet me. And after we met, I get a phone call, and he says, "Hey, I'd like to invite you out to dinner." And so myself and my host, Alexander Zarianov, went there with Steven, his son, and his entourage. And a very pleasant evening. But I had been trying to meet with Opti Aladanov, but he was at the General Staff Academy, so it's very difficult to get up. But the phone rings, and it's Opti. He says, "Hey, I'm available." And so I turned to Steven Seagal and said, "Hey, do you mind if Opti Aladanov joins us?" And he's like, "Never met him before." He's like, "Sure." And so Opti comes in, and it's pretty fun to introduce Opti to Steven Seagal and the conversation that took place. But so Opti's there, and I'm just a impudent, junior Marine officer at heart, and so I said something like, because he, Opti, being a Chechen warrior, is putting digs in at the Marines, and I'm putting digs in back at him, and but I said, "Come on, man, you're a general. What the hell do you know about fighting? You're in the rear with the gear." Oh, that pissed him off. He pulls out his cell phone, and he's a nice guy. He wasn't that angry at me, but he was a little perturbed that I said what I said. And he starts opening up videos, and he said, "Do generals do the forward reconnaissance when their unit goes into combat?" And he's showing him on a BMP, driving in there. Then they take fire, and a couple of they get a call that a BMP had been hit, and a couple of the Chechen soldiers were wounded and needed to be evacuated. And there were no other units available at that time, heavy fighting. And so Opti jumps in the BMP and drives it up to the guys. He gets out, and he's laying down suppressive fire. You hear the rounds going over his head, bing, 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 bing. The Chechen next to him gets hit. He's down. Opti's boom, boom, smiling on his face, patches up this guy, evacuates this guy, gets him out, gets him in, fires off some more rounds, and then drives the damn BMP away. A major general in the Russian army just went in and rescued wounded Chechens under fire and evacuated them personally. And I went, "Okay, I guess you're not a TikTok warrior." No, he's the real deal. I told you this is a real leader. But it was an interesting night. Never, ever, ever, ever impugn the courage of a Chechen.
So, Scott, I wanted to just transition to the overall battlefield, because on the one hand, you have NATO via Ukraine invading Russia. And on the other, all of the Western mainstream media is saying that Russia is not rushing its forces from the front line, from the Donetsk area or any other area, to Kursk. And this is one of the troubling signs, or the risks, as The Economist calls it, that perhaps Ukraine is gambling on a losing bet. So, Scott, what's happening overall right now in the conflict? Because Kursk, everyone has their attention on Kursk. it is very significant. It's obviously incredibly dangerous, as you have reminded us. But what overall is happening right now on the front lines that perhaps is related to this Kursk offensive, and why it's happening, and also just what it really says about where the conflict is going overall?
Well, I mean, we should remember that before Kursk went down, the Russians have been carrying out their offensive operations in the Donbass, in Zaporizhia, and to a lesser extent in Kherson. Kherson is primarily a holding action. Um, but I don't know if I have my. I went to the gym. I don't know if the shirt's on backwards or not. I just looked at the seams. I might have it inside out. That's okay. It's just a new style. But that's what happens when you rush back from the gym. Sorry.
I appreciate that you rushed.
But the well, I actually rushed back from pizza with my wife, but prior to that, I was doing some stuff. Scott's retard moment. Hey, sorry, man. There is. It is what it is. I told you I had a difficult week, so you got to forgive me a little bit. But no, the Russians have been on the offensive, and it's an offensive that is premised on the notion of attrition warfare, and the goal is to wear down the Ukrainians to the point of total collapse. And the Russians have pretty much achieved this. The Ukrainians are in a desperate situation right now. The Russians are making, critical gains on a daily basis. 5 kilometers here, 6 kilometers there, 10 kilometers there. Some places, 500 meters, and some places 100 meters. But they're advancing all along the line of contact. And the Ukrainians don't have any reserves to plug the hole. So as they fall back, it's not like they're falling back on a prepared position with fresh troops. The exhausted troops have just had to leave an untenable position or falling back to an equally untenable position. And the next day, the Russians are going to push them back and keep pushing them back until all the Ukrainians are killed or surrendered or captured. There's nothing left. Zelensky's been saying he has 9 brigades. He said, I got 9 brigades of equipment, but I only have 3 brigades of men. I think it was I got 9 brigades of men, but I only have 3 brigades of equipment or something of that nature. Whatever, but he said that's going to be used for this counteroffensive, this offensive they launched. And the Ukrainian army, the guys on the front lines are like, hey, those 20,000 guys with all the new toys, all the M1 tanks. How many M1 tanks have been blown up in Kursk right now? A whole bunch. How many Leopard tanks? A whole bunch. How many Bradleys? A whole bunch. How many Strikers? A whole bunch. How many Martyrs? This is all brand new Western equipment. It's all being blown up in Kursk instead of being brought down to stabilize the front lines in the Donbass. And so while we're all talking about Kursk, the Russians keep it. Now, some people say that Kursk was designed to get the Russians to take the troops that were on the offensive in that area and bring them up, and thereby buy the forces their time. That didn't work. If you look at Abdiel Adanov's the force that he has, I mentioned the second Special Forces Brigade. But one of the units that's under his command right now is the 810th Marine Brigade, and that's the brigade that it fought in the Battle of Mariupol, and it's been fighting in the Zaporizhia area in a relatively static part of the lines. That's been pulled out. And so the Russians did pull forces out that were more or less engaged in positional warfare. But they didn't pull any of the maneuver forces, the forces that are actively maneuvering against Ukraine. They all stayed engaged. They all still have their, ammunition supplies, their fuel allocations. They are operating according to plan. The Kursk invasion didn't disrupt the Russian offensive operations at all. Russia pulled troops out of Belarus, including some former Wagner units. Russia has brought in troops from other parts of Russia, and Russia has deployed reserves that it was holding for the Donbass operation and brought them in. But the people say, well, that's a victory. Well, it's not, because the Ukrainian, as Opti said, one of his last things he said, I, being Opti, have said that always that the war will end this year, that the Ukrainian army can't do it. But he said, I always had to think and say, well, gosh, but what about those reserves? What about all those M1 tanks? What about all those Leopard tanks that we haven't destroyed yet? They're still out there. And how do we get to them? He said the Ukrainians just solved the problem for us. They brought them to us. And he says, so you just made our victory absolutely certain, because now, in addition to destroying you down there, we've destroyed your strategic reserve and you've got nothing left. You've got nothing left. So whatever diversion of forces that the Ukrainians thought was going to take place that would change, the momentum on the battlefield, that didn't work. Worse, the forces that were brought together have solved a big problem for the Russians: how to close with and destroy Ukraine's strategic reserves, which they're now doing in Kursk. So this just, I think, has hastened the defeat of the Ukrainian military, and with it, I think, for the first time, you're starting to hear, real talk in the West about how Zelensky's time's up, that he's no longer trusted as a leader, too corrupt, too inefficient. It's time to replace him, and there's active discussion apparently to do just that. You've seen a change in the tenor. I mean, Putin has said no more negotiation. If you remember back in the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, Putin said that he has a peace proposal on the table. It's a modification of the Istanbul Communique, updated to take into account the reality that the new territories are Russia and will forever be Russia. But other than that, Russia's willing to do everything they talked about in the Istanbul Communique. But he said this isn't going to be on the table forever. And when we take it off, it's never going back on. And then the only discussion will be is terms of unconditional surrender. And that's where we're at right now. Ukraine thinks they're doing all this so they can improve their negotiating position. They don't have a negotiating position. They have just sealed their death warrant. It's over. They just don't know it yet. But the other thing is, they may have cost themselves another 20-30% of their country. Dmitry Medvedev, who has a reputation of being the bad cop to Putin's good cop, irrationality to rationality, but whose voice can't be ignored, has come out and said that because Ukraine went into Kursk, they're going to lose Sumy, they're going to lose Kharkov, they're going to lose Dnipropetrovsk, they're going to lose Mykolaiv, and they're going to lose Odessa. And it ain't ever coming back. Again, Ukraine dug their own grave. There are huge consequences for what just happened. Huge consequences. One of them may be the pending destruction of the Ukrainian governmental center in Kiev. This Russian senator that I interviewed recently said that there will be a Russian retaliation. It will use weapons that have not been used to date. Horrible weapons, terrible weapons. I don't think he's talking nuclear. I think he's talking something else. But he said when we use them, it will send a shiver of fear down the spine of everybody in the West, because you can't imagine what's about to happen. And these weapons can be used against you. And he hinted, I don't want to put words in his mouth. There'd be a lot of speculation on my part, but I hope he's wrong, because if he's right, it's not going to be a good day for the Ukrainians. But they brought it on themselves. They really have. And I know people out there take umbrage. Scott, they are allowed to defend themselves. You forget they aren't allowed to defend themselves because they are criminals. They are Nazis. They were installed through an illegal coup promulgated by the CIA, and that from 2015 up until 2022, NATO was training the Ukrainian army for the singular purpose of killing Russians in the Donbass. NATO slides brag about it. Every 55 days, we train 500 Ukrainians here so they can go here and kill Russians there. We bragged about it. So don't tell me about Ukraine's inherent right of self-defense. If they wanted self-defense, they wouldn't have attacked the Russian people of the Donbass. They wouldn't have carried out the rape of Mariupol. No, Ukraine brought this on themselves, but Russia was willing to limit the consequences of this criminal action to, neutrality, getting rid of NATO out of the soil, and minimizing the Banderist ideology, but leaving Ukraine relatively intact. In fact, if the 1 April Istanbul communique had been implemented, Kherson and Zaporizhia would be Ukrainian. Russia wasn't going to take them, had no intention of keeping them. But only when Ukraine took in the $48 billion of U.S. military aid and began, launching attacks that showed they had no intention of pursuing peace, did Russia say, well, then you have forfeited your right to govern over the ethnic Russian peoples of Kherson, Zaporizhia, and the Donbass. A referendum was held, and they've now become a permanent part of the Russian Federation.
Yeah, and earlier you're speaking about lies and lies and lies. I mean, one of the biggest arguments right now that everybody in the political establishment in the West, whether it's media or within the political class, Biden, you have the poodles like Estonia's government, all the representatives of the NATO axis, they are all saying, and the Western media is also saying, that Kursk and what Ukraine is doing and what NATO is doing is entirely legal, that this is entirely within the bounds of what Ukraine is allowed to do, given that, and this is a narrative that we've been pushing back on since the beginning, Russia is in a war of conquest in Ukraine. I mean, Scott, perhaps correct the record there. A war of conquest, they're calling what Russia is doing. Meanwhile, Ukraine is literally, and NATO is literally talking about usurping Russian territory to leverage in negotiations.
Again, I think the Ukrainians have to reflect on the reality of history, and the West needs to reflect on it as well. Up until January 2014, Russia had no territorial ambition whatsoever for any part of Ukraine. Russia recognized the 1991 borders, even though Russia was pained by Crimea, which is dominated by ethnic Russians, has always considered itself to be part of Russia, even though that was now part of this Ukrainian state that was cobbled together during Soviet times and gained its independence in 1991. Russia was respecting that. Only after the illegal CIA brokered coup d'etat in February of 2014, when the rabid right-wing neo-Nazis, the Stepan Bandera supporters who've been funded by the CIA for over, 1948, 88, 40, I mean, close to 50 years. No, more than that, 70 years. The CIA-backed ultra-nationalists made a move on Crimea to go in there. They were on buses, they were on trains, and the Crimean Russians rose up. And the Russian government came to their assistance with the little green men. And next thing you know, Crimea is Russian. And Russia said, you don't get to come in here with your Ukrainian ultranationalism and, vandalize and brutalize Russian citizens. But after that, Russia, the Donbass exploded. Russia didn't run in and say, oh, we're going to make this, part of Russia too. Russia actually turned down the expressed desire of the Russian people of Donbass, who said, we want to be part of Russia. Russia said, no, you're Ukraine. We'll defend your rights, but we're not going to support, you being separated from Ukraine. The Minsk agreements were designed to achieve the rights of the Russian people without sacrificing sovereign control over this territory by Ukraine. But Ukraine and NATO and the collective West had no intention. We now know Angela Merkel, Francois Hollande both said that the Minsk Accords were a sham designed to buy time so that NATO could train a Ukrainian army to solve the Donbass problem through force of arms. It was a sham. It's not Russia that was looking for war. It was NATO and Ukraine. It was NATO looking for war using Ukraine as a proxy. In 2008, William Burns, the ambassador of the United States to Russia, warned about this in a memorandum back to the State Department called "Niet means Niet," no means no. He said it's a red line. NATO joining, Ukraine joining NATO is a red line. And if we push this, we being the United States and the West, it will lead to Russia having to send in military forces, meaning a war, and it will result in the loss of Crimea and the Donbass. I mean, it's 2008. Burns was 100% correct. Today, he's a director of the CIA. Hopefully, he has the same level of cognitive capability in that role as well. But, NATO picked this fight. Russia didn't pick this fight. But when it became clear that Ukraine was intent on using military force to resolve the Donbass problem, Russia intervened. And when it was clear that NATO had no intention of allowing Ukraine to make peace with Russia after the initiation of the special military operation, Russia said that these Russian peoples of these new territories of Novaya Russia will become part of Russia. And they had a referendum. But all of this has a cause-effect relationship, whereas Russia is reacting to the proactive violence carried out by NATO and their Ukrainian proxies. The territorial acquisition that took place wasn't because Russia initiated action to do this. It was because Russia was compelled to do something in response to the irresponsible behaviors of the collective West and their Ukrainian proxies. And today, if Dmitry Medvedev's words are borne out, Ukraine will lose more territories, not because Russia wanted to take them. Vladimir Putin just put a peace treaty on the table that would have prevented this from happening. But it was Ukraine that opted out. It was Ukraine that agreed to be used as a proxy force of NATO to invade Russia. And now Ukraine's going to pay the price.
And maybe lastly on this, Scott, as you have talked about, Putin, the Russian government, Russia, they're saying peace is off the table. They had a proposal. Given what's happened with Kursk, that's just complete. That's crossed the red line. Another red line that's over. Now, what's so interesting about what's been going on, Scott, on the front lines, despite the grim situation for Ukraine, it feels like the United States, it feels like NATO is doing everything possible to not just prevent any kind of settlement to the conflict politically and militarily, but also to push the question that you're so interested in and do so much hard work on, push this conflict into a potentially nuclear situation. I mean, the things I'm hearing about, not only Zaporizhia power plant attacked, but also the Kursk power plant being attacked. Of course, we don't have all the details about what's been happening, but there's a big danger here. And when I hear Biden and I hear Josep Borrell, when I hear these people, they're so Lindsey Graham, we've brought him up here before. This is bold and beautiful, according to Lindsey Graham. Your final reaction.
I mean, I don't know how disconnected from reality you have to be to speak of bold and beautiful. Look, I'm a military guy. I recognize that there are circumstances in modern life around the world where the use of military force is a tragic necessity. There's evil out there. There are bad people out there, people who seek to do harm to good people. And sometimes the armed forces are necessary to defend oneself against that. Um, but having experienced war, and again, I want to make everybody understand, I'm no war hero. I'm no special forces gunman. I'm no frontline infantryman. I was an intelligence officer, but I was an intelligence officer that leaned way forward. So you know, I've experienced war. I've seen it firsthand, and I hate it with every fiber of my being. Um, and I believe that we have a duty and responsibility as warriors to ensure that before we send young men and women off to fight and die for a cause, that we make sure that that cause is worthy of the sacrifice we're asking them to make, and that we have exhausted all means possible short of war to prevent war, to solve this problem, in another way. So when I see somebody like Lindsey Graham just up there, I mean, literally foaming at the mouth, promoting war, promoting war, promoting war, he sickens me. And Tom Cotton sickens me. All the warmongers out there sicken me. Um, war is not a beautiful thing. War is an ugly thing. War has devastated Ukraine. War has devastated the Russian people. I mean, they too have suffered losses. There are Russian mothers who will never see their sons again. There are Russian wives who have to raise a family on their own because the husbands are dead. Um, Russian sisters don't have brothers. Uncles don't have nephews. it's This is a tragedy. This is a human tragedy. Hundreds of thousands of dead Ukrainians, tens of thousands, if not 100,000 dead Russians, the wounded, and then just the psychological damage that's done to human beings when called upon to kill other human beings. It's not natural. It's not natural to kill people, and when you do it, and when you see it, when you experience it, it never leaves you. It's stuck in your head. And fortunately, most people are able to compartmentalize it and say, okay, that's rattling around in there, but I'm gonna do my best to keep on going. But some people can't, and it changes them. If you go to war, you're broken forever. Some people are broken a little bit, some people are broken totally, but you're broken, and we need to understand that all these nice, healthy young men and women who could be such an important part of our society, when we send them to war, they break. When they come back, they're broken, and then it's society's obligation to fix them. But we can't fix them. You can't. All you can do is bind their wounds and hope that the scars aren't too deep, aren't too crippling. Um, but it just bothers me when I see people out there promoting the continuation of this conflict, the expansion of this conflict, as if this is a good thing. It's not a good thing. This war should never have been fought. The Russians put a peace proposal on the table in December of 2021, a draft peace treaty or draft treaty with NATO and a draft treaty with the United States to talk about how to reimagine European security framework so that the national security interests of Russia were respected along with the national security interests of NATO and the collective West. It was supposed to be a negotiation. The West said no. See, the West only dictates outcomes. They never negotiate solutions. There is no such thing as diplomacy in the West. Diplomacy consists of a diplomat backed by a general demanding my way or the highway. But Russia sought peace. And even when Russia initiated the special military operation, it was designed, frankly speaking, to get the Ukrainians to the negotiating table as quickly as possible. In less than 6 days after the initiation of the special military operation, Ukraine was at the negotiating table in Gomel. 3 rounds of discussions there. Then they moved to Turkey. And by the end of March, that is, ladies and gentlemen, a little more than a month after the war started, they had a peace proposal. And had Ukraine accepted that peace proposal, 500,000 plus Ukrainian men would be alive today. Tens of millions of Ukrainians who were displaced from their homes would be in their homes. Children would be at school. Women would be caring for these children. Factories would be up and running. The Ukrainian economy would be thriving. and the Russians too wouldn't be bearing the cost of a war. But no, people like Lindsey Graham opted to go to war. Now Lindsey Graham's a little perfumed princess. Who, yes, I know he was a colonel in the Air Force. He was a judge advocate. He's never seen combat, never been close to combat, doesn't know what combat is. But he's out there, foaming at the mouth as if he is the modern day incarnation of Attila the Hun. I would encourage Lindsey Graham to get into a striker and maybe go tour the Kursk battlefield, the one that he applauds so much. Spend a lot of time running around there. And maybe he'll never come back because everybody goes to Kursk, entering Kursk from the Ukrainian side. They're not coming back. But he doesn't have the courage to do that. He doesn't have the intestinal fortitude. And most of the people out there cheerleading for war don't have it either. They're not willing to do what it takes to put their money where their mouth, to say, I'm not a hypocrite. I'll do what I ask other people to do. But we have a generation of people also that the American public, we're conditioned by 2+ generations of low intensity conflict. For us, war, a bad day at war is, 13 guys going down in a helicopter. Oh my God, that's sad. Now it is. I'm not minimizing that. It's sad, especially for the families, for their colleagues and stuff. But a bad day in war is, your brigade, 5,000 men suffering 60% losses. That's modern war. That's what's happening right now in Ukraine. General Christopher Cavoli, who's the commander of American ground forces in Europe, commander of NATO ground forces, said back in 2023, early 2023, that NATO couldn't imagine the scope of violence that's taking place, the destruction that's taking place in this battle. And what that means when you say can't imagine, it means we don't have plans in place to deal with modern warfare because we didn't imagine. A plan is what you've imagined is going to happen and how you're going to deal with what you've imagined. But if you're thinking that when you go to war, that your attrition rate will be 3% a day, so you build your logistical sustainability plan on that attrition rate, when reality is your attrition rate may be 60% a day. And now you don't have sustainability. It means NATO can't go to war. NATO can't do this kind of combat. That's the reality. Our military is not ready to fight this kind of fight, but perhaps even more important, the American people aren't ready for this. Are we ready for 5,000 body bags a day? I don't think we are. But that's what's going to happen if we go to war in Ukraine. Full-scale war against the Russians. It's going to slaughter us. And I don't think the people understand this. We watch too many movies. We watch, American Sniper. See, we can kill everybody. We watch, all these, Black Hawk Down, all these low intensity conflict things. You go watch Saving Private Ryan. Look at the assault on Omaha Beach and the number of American dead there. You're going to get a slight idea of what's going to happen if we go to war on the ground in Europe against the Russian military. We should be pursuing peace. This is what I've been advocating. Nonviolent solutions to difficult problems. The internet, it can be very difficult. I'm not saying that diplomacy is easy. It can be extraordinarily difficult, frustratingly so. But I think society's better off when a bunch of old men and old women are sitting in a room yakking. We could yak all night. Go to sleep, wake up in the morning and yak. You know what's happening when we yak? Nothing. It's wonderful. But when we stop yakking and we start banging, now we got dead bodies. I think we're better off expending hot air than we are expending blood. And I think we should put a lot more time and resources into the expenditure of hot air and far fewer resources into the expenditure of blood. I think the world would be a safer place and a better place if that was where our priorities were.
Yeah, always get a kick out of those who get so angry, especially in the West, especially in our country, Scott. They get so mad at Russia, China, Iran. They talk too much. They talk too much. It's like, well, they're trying to build a diplomatic solution. They're trying to build upon international law and follow international law. They're trying to do that thing that isn't murdering a bunch of people and destabilizing the world. But Scott, we would be remiss to not comment on the Middle East, at least for the last minutes that we have here. And then for everyone who left a super chat, we will not be able to take questions because I do have a hard stop, and I know, Scott, you have time that needs to be respected. But let us just close on the situation that's happening in the Middle East. So there's something I perhaps we can focus on, because a lot of people have been getting hung up on when is Iran going to attack? When is Hezbollah? When is the Axis of Resistance? When are they going to just let it all rain down on Israel? I think the real question is, though, Scott, is where are things at right now for Israel? Because the reports are pretty damning. The Western media, even you have CNN, you have New York Times. They're all coming out and talking about this is the end of the line for Israel. Its operation, also known as the genocide for many people, has reached its limits. Hamas, the resistance, they're still very much in play. And we do have this long war now that Israel has entered with the Axis of Resistance. Regardless of whatever Iran does, whatever Hezbollah does, it's a long war that's not going to end. Israel has crossed the line. So, Scott, how did we get here, and what is the reality? Because I think we are getting caught up in a lot of for very good reason, a lot of the bluster of the moment. But what is the reality of this situation for Israel and, of course, for the region as a whole?
Well, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. Israel's not winning. You know, they're in fact, I personally believe that Israel's been fatally injured by this. That the damage that's been done to Israel's reputation by their genocidal behavior towards the people of Gaza is irreversible. That Israel will never recover from this, nor should it, to be honest. A lot of this damage is, of course, in terms of the public relations aspect, but there's a legal aspect of that too, because the International Court of Justice has literally defined Israel as an apartheid state. That's a big deal. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for the Prime Minister of Israel, the military chief of staff, and other individuals for the crime of genocide. This is a big deal. You don't walk these findings back; they don't disappear. You don't get to erase that ledger. The other issue is economic. The economic damage. I mean, we talk about Hezbollah, we talk about Iran, talk about Hamas. Let's talk about the Houthi. They've carried out one of the most successful naval blockades in history, and they don't have a navy, at least not one of any note. But what they do have is ballistic missiles and drones and cruise missiles that are used to target shipping that's seeking to transit the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb, Gulf of Aden. Maybe that's the other way around. Get up to the Suez Canal or get to the southern port of Eilat. And they've shut it down. The Israelis have had to close the southern port of Eilat. They're going bankrupt. They're suffering billions of dollars of damage. This translates into poor industrial performance, loss of jobs. Now we couple onto that the fact that Hezbollah has pretty much caused Israel to depopulate much of the north of Galilee. People had to flee their towns and villages and seek refuge elsewhere. This is on top of the tens of thousands that had to flee around Gaza. So you have a significant number of homeless in Israel who aren't working because their jobs are shut down, and Israel has to sustain this. Israel's collapsing economically. Before the October 7th, raid by Hamas on Israel, Israel was deeply divided over the issue of Benjamin Netanyahu's effort to transform the Israeli judicial system in a manner that would make it impossible to indict him for very serious charges of corruption. This got to the point where Israeli society was divided to such an extent that the president of Israel warned, literally in the weeks leading up to October 7th, that Israel is dangerously close to a real civil war, to breaking down, that to have Israelis fighting Israelis. That problem hasn't gone away. It's still there. But the main thing is that the world now believes strongly that there must be a Palestinian state. Israel had done its best in suppressing that and trying to create the conditions that would never allow a Palestinian state to reach fruition. And there were many Gulf Arab states that were going along with this, Saudi Arabia, etc., who were looking for improved relations, normalized relations with Israel. But today, that's it. Israel has lost this fight. The world is committed to the creation of a Palestinian state. Right now, they're talking about a two-state solution, but here's the thing. In order to get that two-state solution, Israel will have to commit to reversing most, if not all, of the settlements on the West Bank. And this will result in the violent objection on the part of Israeli settlers. I call them the Brooklyn Jews who come from America because they know they can get away literally with theft and murder of Palestinian land and Palestinian people. They will rise up. There will be a significant level of civil unrest resulting from this. That we part and parcel of the overall deterioration of Israel as a nation state. Millions of Israelis hold dual citizenship. We already see hundreds of thousands of Israelis fleeing Israel because it's just not a good place to live right now. But what happens when millions leave? What happens when the indigenous Jewish population of the Levant drops from 9 million to 5 million, drops from 5 million to 3 million? Meanwhile, the population of the camera just went out of focus there. I don't know if that's me getting drunk or my camera getting drunk, but
it looks like it's getting you out of focus for some reason.
There we go.
There you go.
Oh my God. Keep it out of focus, Ritter. It was better blurry. So, but the point is that I lost my train of thought, but that we'll just leave it at that because I don't know where I was.
Well, I think the point was made about the economic catastrophe that Israel is placing itself in, all of the dislocation that now Israel, I guess unironically, given that it has been the perpetrator of this for so many years, now is finding itself in this very unstable situation. And you mentioned the economic side of it, but Scott, it feels like it's compounding because there's this economic cost that Israel is experiencing, and also there's this always looming, and I just don't see this ending, this looming reality of Hezbollah, of Iran, that they are becoming more and more and more ready and willing to engage with Israel militarily, and Israel continues to push for it. This is what it blows my mind, is that they're continuing to push for something that even the Western media is admitting would be a complete disaster for Israel. So what would it actually be like for Israel to engage in a intensified conflict with forces like Iran, like Hezbollah, which Israel seems to be threatening and pursuing absolutely egregious crimes like assassinating major leaders of Hezbollah, for example. What would this mean for Israel?
Well, it would mean the physical destruction of Israel. Israel is not in a position to fight Hezbollah in Iran at the same time and prevail. Under the best possible conditions in 2022, 2023, without an exhausted army, with the full support of the United States, in exercise conditions, Israel tested whether or not it could take on Hezbollah, take on Iran, and at the same time, and the answer is no. Today, Israel's been gutted by nearly 9 months of war in Gaza. The Israeli military is not, it's not designed to fight for 9 straight months. It's run out of spare parts for its tanks, for its armored vehicles. It's run out of ammunition. The personnel are exhausted morally and physically. So Israel is in no position to fight Hezbollah or fight Iran, and the Israeli Defense Force knows this. But Benjamin Netanyahu also knows that he can't be the prime minister of Israel if Israel seeks a ceasefire. That in order to stay on as the leader of Israel, he needs Israel to be in a constant state of conflict. But he has to manage that conflict, because you can't provoke a straight up war with Hezbollah and Iran. That's a war you would lose. What you need to do is manage this conflict to be right below the threshold for total war. Iran and Hezbollah are thinking the same thing. They don't want a full-scale fight with Israel either. Lebanon has been digging out of the consequences of 2006. They haven't fully recovered from the last time, Israel bombed Beirut because of an Israeli-Hezbollah conflict. And Hezbollah isn't just simply a resistance movement anymore. It's a political party, one of the leading political parties in Lebanon that's responsible for the totality of Lebanon. So they're not going to be pushing for a fight with Israel that will destroy the nation that, they claim to be, part of the leadership of. Iran is not looking for a fight with Israel. Iran's looking to go to Kazan in October and participate in the BRICS conference, to be part of this new, Eurasian economic miracle. That's their focus. Israel understands that neither Hezbollah nor Iran want to see this thing escalate, which is why Israel carried out what I call the perfect provocation. They crossed the red lines of Hezbollah by attacking Beirut. They crossed the red lines of Iran by attacking Iran. But they did it in a very limited way, a very focused way, that makes Hezbollah and Iranian retaliation very difficult, because now you're asking Hezbollah and Iran to throw away everything that they've worked so hard for decades to build. So I think one of the reasons why we see the delay in a response is that both Hezbollah and Iran are looking for, how to strike the balance between the need to retaliate. They must retaliate. There will be a retaliation, and the necessity of making sure that whatever retaliation takes place is extraordinarily effective, so that the Israelis understand what happened, but B, designed not to promote an Israeli response. And that way you can nip this thing in the bud. And here's the most important part: stay the course on a policy direction that's succeeding. Both Hezbollah and Iran know that the axis of resistance is winning the war against Israel, and that if they can simply stay the course with the focus on Gaza, that Israel will continue to make poor decisions that empower the people of Gaza. Israel said they wanted the total destruction of Hamas, that they'll never sit down with Hamas, never deal with Hamas. Well, Hamas is winning, so Israel's going to have to do that. But how has the Russians and Chinese worked around this? Well, the Russians are the ones who initially brought Fatah and Hamas together in Moscow to talk about creating a new political identity that encompasses both. but keeps Hezbollah leadership in place, but they're no longer called, Hamas leadership in place are no longer called, Hamas. That's already been implemented. You know, China just brought 14 factions together in Beijing, where they now operate as a singular political front. What's important about this? Hamas dominates all of this, but it's no longer going to be called Hamas. It can be called something else. So they're, remember that jaw, 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 that yak, yak, yak? Well, maybe now there'll be people that are in a position to negotiate to yak, 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 who aren't called Hamas, and Israel will have to will have to find a way to deal with that. The axis of resistance is winning this fight. So why would they want to change a fight that they're winning? Why would they want to go all in on a hand of cards that isn't a guaranteed winner? So I know there's a lot of people out there who are frustrated, angry at Israel, and are begging for some sort of retaliation that puts Israel in its place. Israel's being put in its place now. If you're for Palestine, then you should be for the solution that ends with a Palestinian state. And a war between Iran and Israel, Hezbollah and Israel, that's not the best path to get to that. Avoiding the escalation of conflict so that the world can confront Israel with the evil that it has done is probably the best path to Palestinian statehood.
Yeah, and you said the axis of resistance is winning. We can see that. Maybe your final reactions to this, Scott. We see the report. I mean, this psychological warfare, some are calling it, where Iran and Hezbollah and the entire axis of resistance, they make statements. There's rumors of preparations. There's talks about whatever happens will happen. It happens on their terms, and it'll happen in a way that is bigger and much more impactful than, let's say, April, when Iran responded to Israeli war crimes on the embassy in Damascus. But at the same time, now you see also reports of the United States scrambling, of the entirety of the political establishment, in the West, other than, and of course you have Qatar in there, but other than Israel, of course. But you have them scrambling and almost admitting that Iran and the rest of the axis of resistance, they're likely to stand down if the carnage in Gaza ends, if the genocide ends, if it ceases, if it stops. It's almost an admission in how I look at it, whether there's any facts to it or not. It's almost an admission that, as you said, Scott, the axis of resistance is having such an impact doing what they're doing. So your reaction to those reports that we're hearing, where it's almost as if Iran stating and preparing, and the rest of the axis of resistance preparing for an escalation with Israel, is paying dividends already.
Well, I mean, first of all, understand that maintaining your forces at a high state of readiness is very expensive, and you don't get anything out of it because you're ready for an attack that isn't coming, which means you're not engaged in other military activity. You're not contributing to the day-to-day military mission. You're just simply waiting. The United States is, redeployed naval forces. That's going to cost us, billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars a day in, spinning up naval forces. In a way, Iran and Hezbollah are winning simply by making the United States burn up resources, make Israel burn up resources. But we also can never forget that what Israel did, assassinating these senior leaders, crossed a red line, both for Hezbollah and Iran. And if Iran and Hezbollah don't respond, they're just leaving open the door for the United States or for Israel, to do it again, to cross this red line, to assassinate people. So regardless of the issue of a ceasefire, etc., I believe that both Hezbollah and Iran need to come up with a response that will deter Israel from doing this again. And I think that nations like Russia, China, um, are directly working to find an equitable solution that doesn't allow this conflict to spin out of control. I think the United States is doing the same thing. Whether or not they'll be able to find a solution or a formula that's acceptable to Iran, acceptable to Hezbollah, that accomplishes, the issue of establishing deterrence. Because if Iran doesn't reestablish the deterrent value of its missile force, Israel's proven that they can reach deep inside Tehran in the most sensitive guest villas guarded by the Iranian intelligence services and kill somebody. That means that they can knock off senior leadership, senior military leadership, senior civil leadership. This is an unsustainable reality for Iran. They have to establish some sort of deterrence-based reality that has Israel saying, "Oh yeah, we don't want to cross that line right now because we'll pay far greater a price than anything we could possibly gain from it." So there will have to be a retaliation. I think Iran is looking for, um, something that strikes a balance between punishing Israel and not over provoking Israel. I think Hezbollah is the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's 100% correct. And, it totally strikes back at also, we talked about this in April when it happened, or I believe, no, actually, I was in China. This always happens, actually. I'm always abroad when something big like this happens. But when I got back, we spoke on this show about the retaliation from Iran. And you said, Scott, it was meant to establish deterrence, that Israel had crossed the red line, had killed top leaders inside of the IRGC, inside of an embassy, inside of the Iranian embassy in Damascus, and that just has so many different implications and is a literal act of war. And they struck back, and it was pretty significant, but it did not establish deterrence. So, Scott, any last words on what exactly would establish deterrence with Israel? Because it feels like Israel is just a pretty unhinged entity at this point.
Well, again, I can't speak on behalf of the Iranian government, and I'm loath to be seen as providing advice to the Iranian government. It's not my job to advise any government on targeting and things of that nature. But if we just walk through the problem set, Iran, could retaliate in kind. That is to take out a senior Israeli military or civil official. That's difficult to pull off, and it's unpredictable because you just never know how a reaction is going to be, because the reaction will be based upon the public outrage over the assassination or the elimination of this individual. I think it's more likely Iran is looking to, they have to retaliate in a way that does a couple things. One, demonstrates to the Israelis that their air defense system is not a guarantee of taking down any missile attack coming out of Iran. And two, it has to punish Israel, especially those Israeli assets that would be used to strike Iran in retaliation to an Iranian attack. They have to basically say, for instance, we hit this airfield, even though you have it saturated with air defense, we got through, and we took out 3 F-35s or 3 F-15s. And the signal we're sending you is that we can take out your airfields anytime we want to, in the totality of your aircraft. So let's not do this. Let's not go to war. I think I think Iran's looking to find a target that enables them to reestablish deterrence principles without creating the need, based upon domestic political pressure, for Israel to retaliate.
Yes, indeed. All right, Scott, we've been on for a while, so I think we're going to wrap it up here. Everyone who left a super chat, it's been very generous. I'm just going to go through really quickly, okay? Thank you, Raphael, for your super chats. Unfortunately, I won't be reading them because I do have a hard stop, and I know Scott's time needs to be respected. Studio, this was a really great question. Thanks so much for that. We will have to get back to it another show. But really appreciate, that's a really generous super chat. Thank you. Sabat, thank you. Conan, thank you. The Blazer 55, thank you. Thank you for being a member as well. Studio again, thank you. I won't pull it up, but thank you so much. Above all things, love. Thank you. Nice message. Adadola had a good question as well, but we will have to get to it another day. Thank you so much. Thank you for being a member. CPT Salic. Herc Owen, thank you. Rod RR, thank you. Rod RR, thank you. Okay, I'll just pull up you again. Studio, want to know about solution? We'll have to do that another day, Studio, but thank you so much again. Rod, again. Lakiva, thank you so much. We have some repeats. Thank you so much for all of your repetitiousness. Thank you so much, Ahmed. Thank you so much, Jack. Thank you so much, Annie. And then we have, thank you so much, Chris. Regular. We have Sparky here. Thank you so much. And I think this will end the last two. At Large 47, thank you. And PNN Proletariat News Network, thank you. Another day for all of these questions. Scott, it's been really good to be with you. We're going to head out of here. Make sure that you go to the video description. You can find scottritter.com and Scott Ritter's Telegram in the video description, as well as all the places you can support this channel. Scott, any final words to the audience?
No, just thanks for tuning in. Continue to support Danny Dhaiphong. Maybe support me while you can, but again, don't support me because you like me. I mean, that's nice too. But what we're going through right now, you need to support all alternative media, especially those who advocate for causes that you believe in. The U.S. government, we are the America is an empire in decline, and this crumbling empire seeks to take everything down with it. I don't want that solution. That's why I struggle, and Danny and other American patriots struggle to seek to correct this slide by empowering the American people with knowledge and information about the reality of what's going on, so that they can better hold their government officials accountable for what's done in their name. It's sort of what representative democracy is all about. It's about empowering people. The U.S., in my case, is seeking to interfere with my ability to carry out advocacy journalism by manufacturing or looks like they're trying to manufacture a case of willful violation of the Foreign Agent Registration Act. This is a fight for free speech. This is a fight for a free press. And this is everybody's fight, therefore. So support free speech and support a free press, because these are precious rights that tragically the U.S. government, the one that's supposed to serve the people, appears hell-bent to limit these rights, or in some cases just remove these rights altogether.
Yes, indeed. So you heard Scott. It was a huge show tonight. Almost 10,000 of you. I hope you are all going to Scott's Telegram, to Scott's website, to my Telegram, and to all the places to support this channel and support Scott right after we hit the end stream button here. Have a good night, everyone. I will be back with all of you again very soon. Look out for the announcements. See you again later.